Hello everyone, this is Satyaprakash. Welcome to my channel. This is part 17 of ASP.NET Web API. In this video, we'll discuss what is parameter binding in Web API and what is the default convention for that. So before going through this part 17, please visit my part 16 of ASP.NET Web API, that is ASP.NET Web API query string parameter. So you can get this video in my playlist called ASP.NET Web API tutorial. So I will consider the one method in ASP.NET Web API, that is put method. So this method updates the specified employee details. So it has two parameters. One is ID, and based on ID we need to update the employee objects, that is the employee date, right? So here what I've done here is inside a fiddler I have selected the put method, and this field, this URL I have mentioned for using ID parameter, and based on ID we need to update the employee details. First name to Satyaprakash 1, last name to Samantray 1, gender male, and salary 13,000. So before updating we need to check the existing data of employee of ID 1. So this is the ID 1 which is already in our database, that is the ID 1 for first name Satyaprakash, last name Samantray, gender male, and salary 12,000. So we need to update this data of ID 1, right? So what I'll do here is I just click on execute, and when I execute I put some breakpoint inside the put method and check here using our employee date, right? So expand this one, I can see we need to update first name to Satyaprakash 1, gender male, last name Samantray 1, and salary 13,000. This is because it is from body, it requests all these things from in our put method, because in from body, request body, it is not from body. I have mentioned this JSON employee objects. So what I do here is I go for F10. Alright, so it is go to var entity, right? So this entity contains the employee details, right, which is already have it is the old employee details of ID 1, right? So this line of code pastes the employee ID 1 details from the DB. So based on ID 1, the employee details has the old employee details, right? You can see here, okay, not this one, okay, you can see this is the old employee details. Alright, so we need to update it. So go to else statements. So you can see this is the employee date object which is retrieved from the from body, right? Satyaprakash 1, and it is the entity of first name. So this data of Satyaprakash 1 will replace the entity of first name Satyaprakash, because the entity contains the details of ID 1 which is already present in our DB. So same way, last name is Samantray 1, it will replace to Samantray, and gender is male, and it is male as it is because I have mentioned the same thing, and salary 13,000, and it will replace the 12,000, right? So employee date is the object of employee which is already present in our code, and it will retrieve all these things from the request body, and it will replace the entity data of whatever the entity inside. It will replace this data to here based on the ID. So I'll go to F10 here, entity shape changes, right, and go to F10, and it will go to my employee date object. So I just continue. So my employee is updated, right? So to check it, I need to go here and just refresh it. So I can see of ID 1, first name is updated to Satyaprakash 1, last name is updated to Samantray 1, and salary is 13,000. Alright guys, so this is the thing, right? So using our fiddler, I selected the put request and ID of employee in the URI and the employee data in the request body. Alright, so at this point, if we already have executed the request and the employee data is updated as expected. So next scenario is, let's include the ID as a query string parameter. So in the first request, ID is specified as the part of the route data. So I'll tell you here. So for query string, nothing much different. We just mention here a question mark ID equal to 1, right? So what it does is, in Fiddler we have included the ID parameter as a query string parameter. So we need to update to Satyaprakash 2, last name to Samudrai 2, and salary is 14,000, male is as male, gender is as male. All right. So we need to execute this request, and it will go to the debugger, and it will see, we can see the request body, that is all the details which we need to update. And if we'll go here in entity, we'll check what is the existing data in our DB, right? So here, so last time we have updated these things, right? So we need to update the 2 instead of 1. So we can see, check all these things using our debugger. So Satyaprakash 2 to Satyaprakash, you can update it to Satyaprakash 2 to Satyaprakash 1, and it's already updated because my breakpoint is come to salary part. So if you'll go forward for F10, and it will already have updated the employee details. And go to my Fiddler, my employee data is updated. So if you'll go here and refresh it, so it has updated my Satyaprakash 1 to Satyaprakash 2, last name is Samudrai 1 to Samudrai 2, and salary is 14,000. So guys, I'll tell you one thing is, when a put request is issued, so Web API maps the data in the request to the put method parameters in the employee's controller. So this process is called parameter binding, right? And so let's understand the default convention used by Web API for binding parameter, right? So what I'll do is, I'll go to my presentation here. So this is the two things we have discussed, that is what is parameter binding and default convention used by Web API for binding parameters. So what is parameter binding? So Web API binds HTTP request data to the parameters of an action method, that is called put, post, put method. We already have discussed. And action methods in Web API controllers have one or more parameters of different types. So Web API binds action method parameters with the URL query string or with the request body depending on the parameter type. For example, when a put request, okay, is issued, and Web API maps the data in the request to the put method parameters in the employee's controller, so this process is called parameter binding. And what is the default convention used by Web API for binding parameters? So if the parameter is a simple type like int, bool, double, etc., so Web API tries to get the value from URI, either from route data or query string. So if the parameter is complex type like customer, employee, etc., so Web API tries to get value from the request body. So for example, in our case, the ID parameter is a simple type, so Web API tries to get the value from the request URI. So the employee parameter is a complex type, so Web API gets the value from the request body. So that defines is, the ID parameter is the simple type, right? So we have mentioned in the request URI, and the employee parameter is a complex type, so Web API gets the value from the request body. So that it defines is the default convention for parameter binding in Web API. So this is my channel, subscribe and share it to get the updated knowledge on .NET, .NET Core, C#, SQL Server, GitHub and DevOps. So what we have learned today in this video is what is parameter binding and what are the default convention used by Web API for binding parameters. So that's it for today guys. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.